is there good reason to believe that AI and robotics will lead to lower prices? And now that I'm asking this question, I need to specify existing system versus sound money system. But let's just say in the existing system, because a lot of people are claiming that AI and robotics will lead to near zero cost, regardless of what the money is. That's one interpretation, I think, of what you said, Jeff, which is like a line of code, it costs zero, whether or not you're talking about in fiat dollars or Bitcoin. So I guess the question is, as I started to think of the main things that people spend money on, I think the big three categories would be homes, cars or transportation, and food. And I started to think to myself, okay, all these advances in AI and robotics, will those actually lead to cheaper costs of homes, transportation, and food? Or will we enter a world where it's, okay, all the digital things are cheap, but all these real things I still need to use in my life are very expensive?
Yeah, and I think so, John, you're still trapped in that old way of thinking. So the house that you just had mentioned, your home, why has it gone up? Because all the materials in it, all the materials in the house have had the same increases in productivity. And all of the materials in your houses should have dropped by 10 times more than that in the last 100 years. It get better and better. And because all the raw materials into those materials who adds the same automation. Have you seen a lumber mill today versus a lumber mill 100 years ago? The amount of labor in it. Have you seen the self-driving trucks in a mine today versus 100 years ago? All of these things have had the same thing. So why are the prices going up? The prices are going up because the money is driving the prices up, because the money is going down. And so when we think about these assets, the reason we need an asset is because we can't store our money in money. So we chase these other things, these, in this case, house, to protect our money from losing money. And then the house isn't a utility anymore to raise your family. It's a financial asset to protect from debasement to money. And the other things you're talking about too, there becomes more and more regulation in food, in medicine, to be able to protect the interests of the money, the siphoning out the money. And you have this global monopoly over food and medicine and everything else that drives worse and worse outcomes from that global monopoly, all comes from the same thing. So that's what I get in. That's why we have to go through these, because it's such a brain break to what I'm talking about. And that's why you just have to keep coming back to, is the natural, the top, very top, yep, is the natural state of the free market deflation? Yes, no. Yes. Have we ever seen it? No. Meaning your natural ability, we get trapped in the other way of thinking over and over again because we've never seen it. It's hard to realize, and we're measuring those things through the broken lens of a system.
Yeah, I think I have tons of agreement with what you just said, but if I could clarify the particular question, there are people out there who claim AI and robotics are going to lead to deflation in the fiat system.
You can't.
But, okay, so yeah, your view is if the fiat system continues, then it's not going to happen.
Well, it can't, because the fiat system has to debase the money faster to allow that to happen. Because if you allow it, or something has to, more regulation, more control, something has to get. We're talking about the book, I wrote it 6 years ago. In that, so if I was right, what I said, I had to find a smoking gun somewhere. And my premise was the productivity rate from 2000 to 2020, or to 1990 to 2019 was accelerating. And so on the debt side of the ledger, the money side of the ledger, I should have seen an acceleration of how much monetary units were needed. And so we grew debt over that 20-year period by $185 trillion to produce $46 trillion of GDP. $4 of debt for every, so you could understand. And now the total debt at that time was $250 trillion. And I wrote in the book, I said, as much as I'm worried about that total debt, that's not what I'm really worried about. I said, we're on an exponential pattern with where AI is coming. And that means the exponential pattern of the debt, to stop that from happening, has to be on the other side. So if you did a calculation today, now I'm targeting private pools of dark pools of capital and everything else too. But if you actually said, what is the debt today? Only 6 years later, it's about 500 trillion global debt. And so that's what stopped prices from falling everywhere. And that's what's creating the scarcity. And not just the scarcity, that's what's creating the control system this creating bigger government. When the government said, okay, we're going to rip out government, Dodge is going to rip out $2 trillion. If they ripped out $2 trillion, they would have caused a deflationary spiral instantly. It can't happen. Every single government is adding more and more exponential debt or more debt at a faster rate because they have to. Why do they have to? You wouldn't let a credit-based system fail. So if everything started to resolve, and part of what you're seeing in the sell-off right now in Bitcoin is this credit bubble, right? And all these dogs that I love Larry's line here. The money's already gone to money heaven. It's already gone.
Yeah.
And if there isn't massive liquidity at some point pumped in, you're going to get a deflationary spiral. You're going to have the Great Depression on steroids. But you won't let that happen. You'll beg for more money printing.
Yeah. So
that's why from the system, there is no resolve from the system. You have to be completely outside the system. Something in self-custody. It's something that you hold outside of that system because the house is in the system. All of the other assets, everything else is inside that system.
So what do you see happening? What are the central bankers doing? They have to have some kind of plan as things really come to a head. And they're making moves right now. There's stable coins involved. Got to create demand for U.S. treasuries. What do you see being the plan that they're trying to execute here to save the closed and captured system?
Yeah, and just imagine this. And that's what I try to say. There's no probably bad people, but most of these people are they're a pawn in the system that's trying to save the system. What would you do if you were in there and you thought you were fighting in a zero-sum game against China and you needed to bring back manufacturing, but every time to do that, you'd have to make your labor really cheap versus China. And every time you tried to do that, they made their labor cheaper. And so you might say, and then your entire military industrial complex, all of the materials to fund if you need to go to war came from there.
Yeah.
It kind of turns into checkmate. So now what you might do, you might say, okay, I'm going to, and I'm saying from a system perspective where you thought that was the only solution. But you might say, we need control of the money and we need to retain our supremacy of this. And you would say stablecoins. What is a stablecoin? Well, a stablecoin is a guaranteed loss coin against Bitcoin. It is tethered to the system.
Yep.
But because many people in other countries, their guaranteed loss coin is way faster, it loses money faster, they'll see the US dollar as safety.
Right.
And so they will fund that and they will step into that and it'll create a whole bunch of funding for the debt and it will work. But it works by centralizing more. It's a CBDC in disguise.
Right.
It centralizes more faster. It turns into a surveillance state really fast. Now, if you ask a different question, how was the U.S. formed? What created the U.S. superpower? It was a creation of individual rights and freedoms around a free market, to which other nations, other people trapped in their markets raced to. And it became more productive than any nation ever before because the ideas competing in a free market it's always more productive than any centralized market. And so if you ask a different question, how would the US actually win? You'd by observing the principle that actually created the US in the first place. You would move hard into Bitcoin. You would move hard into self-custody. You would make sure that people's privacy was protected. You would make sure that it was a safe place to build this. And if the US doesn't do that, then other countries will, because this is an open network, and that's what's happening in El Salvador. El Salvador is doing that. If you see the change in El Salvador in 4 years, and I've been each year since the beginning. It is so remarkable, the change. And then the perception of what people think El Salvador is versus the on the ground and what the citizens of El Salvador feel, it's just wild. Right?
It does seem very impressive what Bukele is getting done there. It's just shipping on a regular basis like a very efficient corporation and embracing these ideas that are fundamentally correct.
And then more businesses are moving there, and more. And it's by the way, you're just starting, because you wouldn't move there. The capability wouldn't be there because at first, because the capability for the last 40 or 50 years was in a control system and scarcity and scared of going outside, right? It was terrible. And now you've introduced freedom, you've introduced agency, you've introduced spending in Bitcoin, and it's opened up minds. Now, it's still early, but when you watch what's happened in that nation as a result of that, and then large capital pools and large people, capital always looks for a place where capital is to be treated well. And so if you have a free market and you're defending the free market, then what do you think businesses are going to do? Now, first, they'll just put their toe in the water. Is this real, or is Bukele going to go backwards later on? But as they move further on this path, more and more businesses, I'm watching it just even on my fund and some of the companies wanting to make us El Salvador home because it's real.
Yep.
So that stability drives that. In fact, the stability of the U.S. under the Constitution is what drove people there, because they didn't achieve that in their other nations. And then over time, that Constitution gets whittled away by a centralized power structure that created on a central bank. It takes away that have more and more of those individual rights and freedoms and makes them. So we have this crazy world right now where it feels like the world's on fire everywhere, because people are trying, each nation, each person is making a choice. Which system do I want to live in?
Yeah.
And then their energy is reflecting back at them from the system they're living in.
And just to make sure I understood, on the Elon quote, so you're very bullish on AI, robotics, all these exponential technologies, but you don't go as far to say that is going to obsolete money, right? Like you don't see that.
I would. I'd go there, but only on Bitcoin.
So only on Bitcoin, yeah.
It can't on the other system. If it was without Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoin, but privacy tech on top of Bitcoin, like Fiat or eCash or a whole bunch of the privacy tech that's being built in layers on top of Bitcoin. If it was just an open ledger and that system, Bitcoin would be attacked and failed, and it would fail. If it was a protocol that it allowed privacy and communications and everything else on top of Bitcoin that extended it, which it is becoming, then Bitcoin replaces the entire other system. In fact, Bitcoin is repricing all of that other system right now. And it's just which system you're in. But imagine what Elon said from the system that he lives in. And he doesn't promote Bitcoin. Right?
Yeah.
He also created PayPal. He knows, I saw an interview like when he was a young kid about why did he create PayPal, because he understood that you get a tax on everybody else's work if you're at the top of the monetary system. And he knows, so I suspect he knows money. For Tesla to put some Bitcoin on their balance sheet, can you imagine the amount of work he would have had to do to be able to do that? I suspect he knows this. And if he knows this and is acting in the other system, then not that he can't be a great entrepreneur, but I question all of his motivations on all of the other things, because how could you be in that other system? And essentially what it means is your wealth coming faster and faster is coming from stealing the wealth of everyone else faster and faster.
Yeah.
So I'll just say, I certainly agree that in a fiat system, there's no way I could see AI and robotics making money obsolete. Or I think Elon's word was money stops being relevant. If we just want to quote him, his terminology is a little more vague, but that's the word he used. I'll be honest with you guys. I still have a hard time, even in a sound money system, exponential technologies, thinking that even the sound money in that system becomes not relevant or obsolete. maybe I'm not as imaginative as you guys, but I
Well,
think
I mean,
what he,
think about it. Okay, Star Trek is the good thought experiment here because lots of people are familiar with it. This is a largely peaceful future version of humanity, and there is no money. And the ultimate reason is you can just create anything you want at any time through this magical technology called nanotechnology. Like, they don't call it that, but that's effectively what it is. Where you have nanotech that disassembles everything by molecule and reassembles things molecule by molecule very quickly. And you just, all you need is the base inputs of those molecules. And you can make anything you want, and then you can disassemble it perfectly, recycle it into something else. That's where you go. That's the expression of perfectly efficient construction of anything you possibly want. It's called a replicator in the show. That's where you go, and then it's just energy. Basically, you need the energy to do it, and that's like the only bottleneck you have, and the resources, the natural like molecules that exist around. But yeah, that's the idea, is like you can produce anything for almost nothing. The marginal cost of everything goes to zero.
So, John, and I think that's right too, but this is, why wouldn't you believe it? Is it, you wouldn't believe it because you haven't seen it, or because when you run the principles of the natural state of the free market is deflation, meaning the only way to compete more, the only way to gain more is to provide value to somebody else. And that value must flow to you and everyone else at the same time. And then somebody's going to compete with you. We're going to still always have problems, and we're going to constantly compete. But from that, because what is money? It's just an abstract concept for the trade between humans. It's just an abstract concept for our time of our trade, something that we can trade between humans. So imagine you're moving forward on this free market that is Bitcoin, and more people are moving to that free market, and prices are falling faster and faster, and in other words, we're solving problems faster and faster too, because everybody can contribute. You're not a slave inside a system being told what to do. You're contributing to a system that the output has to be other people win, and you win. Imagine from that time, fast forward 70 years, 80 years into the future, those people making a choice to go back to this time. It would seem so ludicrous. It'd take any time in history and go back to that time. It would be like those people couldn't see the new actions of the new history, which is a derivative of all the things that have ever happened before, that we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Got it. So I think my difficulty is I do the Star Trek analogy where you have something, you really would have to get to the point where you have something that you can just create anything out of it with no cost of the inputs. That starts to get me closer to it. But even that, I think, assumes that there's not more things that can be done and more work that can be done and improvements and things like that. As soon as there's more work that can be done and more improvements, I believe you need a coordinating mechanism to coordinate and to incentivize. And I think as long as you need a mechanism to coordinate and incentivize, then right there you have a need for money.
And I agree with that. I agree with that. And that it's just, it wouldn't mean the same as it does to us now in that world.
Yeah, it just maybe is not as important. It's important for certain types of work. There is money in Star Trek, but they only use it when there's like interspecies like coordination happening.
By the way, this is a fascinating thing because the other model is Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It has credits. Yeah.
And the Death Star and the control system and everything else with your opponent. It's actually, if you go back to science fiction of those two shows, it's actually interesting because that's what this fight is about.
Yeah. Star Wars is Fiat and Star Trek is Bitcoin.
Someone needs to write an article about that. That would be a big one.
Yeah, that would be a banger.